All right, I'm going to share my screen. But good afternoon. My name is Lei. I am the CVA, the Community Volunteer Ambassador for the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our general consent statement. So as a visible disclosure, we'd like to inform any participants that any and all Zoom series is and will be recorded. The purpose of this is to provide the Zoom series to those who participated or missed out on the session. It is also provided the information for participants to refer back to. In addition to the visible disclosure, this statement will be orally stated at the beginning of each Zoom series like I am right now. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off to Katie.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Katie Delaney. I'm one of the wildlife ecologists at Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. I'm going to share my screen now. So you all are here to hear about red-legged frogs. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your interest in red-legged frogs. That's me with a couple of co-authors. Sarah Wenner is the biotech that's currently working with me on the project. Mark Mendelson worked with me on the project for about 5 years. And then Seth Riley is the head wildlife biologist or wildlife ecologist at the park. And you might know him from his various interviews that he does on NPR and all other places. He's the famous one around our park. So just to get acknowledgements right off the top, this project is, as you can imagine, reintroducing an endangered species in one of the largest urban park in the United States would be a big project. And so we have lots and lots of collaborators and funders. Not all of these people are funders, but they're all collaborators. And I just wanted to acknowledge them. So this is a project that I run, but these people have given great support, and I wouldn't have been able to do any of it without them. So California red-legged frogs, they're charismatic, as you can see, pretty cute. They were once common in the Santa Monica Mountains, and there's a guy who wrote a checklist of herps in the area named Delisle, and in 1987, he wrote that red-legged frogs were found in all of the major streams of the Santa Monica Mountains. He only found them in a couple of places, or he only talked about them in a couple of places that were actually confirmed sightings, and he never found any when he was doing his surveys. And the last known California red-legged frog was seen in Cold Creek in the early 70s. But by then, that was really the last known place where there was even a frog. So we think that they probably were extirpated from the Santa Monica Mountains in the teens and 20s, and then up to the middle of the last century. So they've been put on the federally, they're federally threatened, which means that they're protected under the Endangered Species Act. They were listed in 1996, and that's because of these severe range restrictions that the species experienced. And you can see, it's a little bit hard to see, maybe it's a little bit easier to see on a Zoom call actually, and when I give big talks it's a little harder to see, but you know, it's maps of California and Baja California. That's the historic range is there on the left in green. The yellow is sort of an area that we don't know if there were frogs there or not. But the green area is sort of the historical distribution of red-legged frogs. So you can see they were widespread all the way from the Bay Area, coastal and above, and coastal California, all the way down into Baja California, and then sort of forming a ring up into the Sierras. And then the current distribution there on the right, that's even been restricted a little bit more because there's fewer populations in Baja than this map even shows, which this is very hard to see because the little green areas. But basically you can see this range restriction with those two arrows that are there on the right-hand side in the map, where basically the whole entire range of the species, all of the southern portion of the range, almost all of it was lost. And there's just a few pockets of California red-legged frogs left in Southern California. And we're lucky enough that one of them is right outside of our boundary right here at SAMO. But that's why they were listed, is because of these range restrictions. There's populations that are left that are just sort of isolated, genetically distinct. That is the case of our population here. They've been isolated for a long, long time. And so basically there's very few counties left in the state that have red-legged frogs. And one of the questions I always get is why were they extirpated or what happened to them? And we don't really know. we think it's probably a combination of urbanization, so people building, pollution and stuff in streams. We think it's a combination of possible droughts that happened throughout the middle and sort of towards the end of the last century. And also, we think it might be a very common disease that amphibians have now, which is a fungus called chytrid fungus. And that fungus may have swept through the populations at some point, and it's really detrimental to most amphibians. And so the ones that are left are sort of maybe resistant, and that's why they're here. So there's multiple threats, but we really just don't know. I mean, people were not studying frogs in the 1930s, really. You know, they're collecting them from museums. So we have museum collections from the teens and the 20s, 1920s and 19 teens that are at the LA County Museum of Natural History. But no one was really out there sort of, sounding any alarms that frogs were disappearing. It's a typical sort of conservation conundrum, a problem of many species. So the need for the project is pretty obvious. We have the idea is if you have listed species, you have rare species. What do you want to do? You want to we think of this as a restoration project. So the same way you would plant native plants to sort of restore the biodiversity of an area and restore the ecosystem of an area. That's what we think of putting frogs back into the streams. And so the goal is the restoration of the native biodiversity. There's only one amphibian missing from the Santa Monica Mountains, and that's the California red-legged frog. So, so we and then all those partners and a lot of people are really interested in putting them back. So the goals are to make more frogs and make more frogs in more places. So we wanted to expand the species range because you remember the map I showed you. We have this small range, but if we can keep bringing them back, we can expand that range again. And then the more places where they can recolonize, the more frogs we can make. And that's the whole idea about listing things on the Endangered Species, putting them under the Endangered Species Act, is to restore them to a number that they don't have to be on listed anymore. The other thing we wanted to do was put them in multiple places in the Santa Monica Mountains in case there was, in case of a catastrophe. So a stream all of a sudden gets polluted, or a disease comes through and kills all the trees, something like that, or a big fire. Spoiler alert, half this talk's going to be about the Woolsey fire, so we'll get to that later. So early project work includes a bunch of reconnaissance, basically. So there's a lot of work that we had to do because if you're going to reintroduce a species, you have to figure out, okay, where are you going to reintroduce them from, and where are you going to put them? So we have a source population that I told you guys about, which is our one lone population. It's in the Simi Hills, north of the 101 freeway. It's on publicly held property, so it's not on private property. It's on park land. We did genetic analysis. I had meetings after meetings after meetings with lots of local experts. We did tons and tons of surveys over about 3 years, where we did fall and spring surveys in lots of places in the mountains. I'll show you where to figure out where is good habitat. We had scoring sheets. We had all of these different things that what do red-legged frogs like, and what is this stream? Does this stream match those needs? And so we did that with at least 30 streams throughout the Santa Monica Mountains every year for a few years. We developed a protocol based on other projects that were successful, mainly the Pinnacles National Monument reintroduction of their red-legged frogs, and we can talk about that if you want. And then, there's a ton of permits. You can imagine working on an endangered species. There's a lot of permits to get. And so the blue lines here are streams that we surveyed. I should just say I surveyed them. I surveyed these. And then the purple stars are the places where we have museum records. So the purple stars are where we have museum records for California red-legged frogs. And most of those, like I said, are from the teens and 1920s. So about 100 years ago, these samples. And so it was very common for them to be found in some of these places. So my favorite is down here on the right-hand side, where you look and they've got them from UCLA. Stone Creek used to go right through UCLA, and then pools on Santa Monica Boulevard. So I thought that was pretty cool. They're pretty urban, right? Rustic Canyon now still is a beautiful canyon. Topanga, Malibu, Cold Creek, Solstice, Trancas, all of that is great habitat. Lake Sherwood, Lake Lindero, that's kind of weird, but They like pond and sort of lake habitat as well. So that's where the museum records that we have are. So that also kind of guided where we wanted to put them. That helped. So that we're sort of letting the biology dictate, letting the frogs tell us where they'll be happiest, and that's what we're focusing on. So just a little bit about the frog. It's the largest native frog in the western U.S. So it's actually a big frog. I'll show you some pictures to show that. They're omnivorous. They'll eat anything that they can get in their mouth. Although most of what they eat is terrestrial invertebrates, so bugs. That's what they're eating, terrestrial bugs. So they don't eat a lot of tadpoles. They don't eat a lot of the macroinvertebrates that are in the stream. They'll eat some, but they mostly eat bugs. I suppose like bullfrogs, they could eat us, like they'll probably eat small birds and small mice and things like that. But I don't think that, and no study has been done that's shown that's a huge part of their diet. But they're fairly long-lived, like 8 to 10 years, we think. So they breed at 2 to 3 years old. So that's important for our reintroduction project it's important for you guys to remember as I go through some of the data, because it does, you don't just introduce frogs and then all of a sudden they're breeding. It takes them a while depending on, if you're putting eggs in a stream or adults in a stream. So I'll go through that with you. It takes them a couple of years to start breeding. Their breeding season is in the winter time, basically, when it's raining here, right? So December and March. That's when although we found some late egg masses before up into April. They are our California state amphibian. That only happened a few years ago. That's our official amphibian, so that's cool. And they were the inspiration for Mark Twain's Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. And they still, I guess up in Calaveras County, they still have this celebrated jumping frog contest, but they use it with bullfrogs. They do it with bullfrogs because there's hardly any red-legged frogs left, but also they're endangered. It's hard to probably have them as pets. This is kind of the habitat that they like. This is a nice coastal stream, lots of poison oak, lots of ferns, rocky habitat, lots of like leaf litter and a canopy that I didn't show in this picture, but a canopy that is, oaks and sycamores. The depth of this water as you go in and to the very end of that pool, the depth, this is totally changed now. It doesn't look like this anymore, but it was at the time, it's probably about 2.5 to 3 feet deep at the end of that. So they like these big, deep pools for breeding in. They don't need water all the time. They're not one of those year-round habitat. They don't need it. They can suffer periods of dryness in their stream, but they generally like to be around water. Water is what they need to breed, but they also, when they're little, when they're young, they use water as an escape. So they kind of bask on the rocks, and then as a predator approaches or as I approach, they'll jump in as cover. It's a good cover. So they don't have to be in water, but they like it. So generally the process of our reintroduction is to translocate eggs. So we have a source population that I kind of keep talking to you guys about, that one in the Simi Hills that's been there for a long time. We can talk about that too if you guys have questions. It was rediscovered in 1999. And that population breeds and breeds and breeds. And they have lots and lots of egg masses there that there's nowhere for those. There's too many egg masses basically for the habitat that's there. So what we do is we got permission as our permits to take a few of those egg masses, partial egg masses. We don't take the whole thing. I'll go through that a little bit in the next few slides, but partial egg masses and move them to the new streams, the translocation streams. We protect them from predators by putting them in pens. And there are these pens that are sitting in the water, and they grow in there, they hatch in there, they grow in there, we feed them. And we raise the tadpoles in the stream there, and then we release them right where they've hatched. So they get put in as eggs, they grow there, we feed them, we monitor them a couple times a week, and we release them right where they hatch. And we do this, and then we just keep watching. So we'll go and we watch for them at every stage. We look for tadpoles, we look for little frogs, then we look for bigger frogs and bigger frogs. Remember, it takes them 2 to 3 years to get to be sort of adult breeding size frogs. And repeat. So we would do this every year. And this is what one of the pens looks like, just to show you sort of up on the right-hand side. It's PVC cube with pet resistant screen, a door with Velcro sewn in the top. The whole thing is zip tied to that screen. And so water can come in and out and flow in and out, but newts and other things like big toe biter bugs or any of those bugs that eat tadpoles and frogs, they can't get in. So we raise the tadpoles in there. Here's the us harvesting some eggs, partial egg masses. That's what they look like there. Where we just basically separate egg masses by hand, and we take about half of an egg mass and put them in Tupperware, basically. And so you can see the Tupperware floating there in the bottom or in the middle, sort of on the left of your screen. And that's like when you get a goldfish at the fair and you just put it in your fish tank to get the water equilibrated. That's what we do. So there's the egg masses. They're in there, and we're about to put them in those pens. This, incidentally, is that pool I showed you before. There's that big rock. So those two pens, they're about a half a meter cube. And so they sit in there. There's the little door that that can close, and we have a little bag there that we have the eggs poured into. That's the eggs right there being poured right into the bag. And then after a few months, they look like this, and they're growing, and you can see what they look like on the inside of the pen. That's some of their food there. We just feed them algae rounds, and there is such a thing as tadpole food. And so we buy tadpole food, and we feed them organic romaine lettuce. And so basically we feed them until they're kind of big, until we are confident that a newt isn't going to come and just eat them all. So, you know, the California newts are long-lived, and they are carnivores. They're definitely carnivores. So they only eat macroinvertebrates and tadpoles. Although we've seen interactions between them, I don't think they're like voracious tadpole eaters. But however, that's what we want to grow them up to their fairly large size, and then release them. And you can see how big they can get. So this is one of my interns, Jordan, her thumb there, if you can see it, thumb and fingers. And you can see these are about 2 to 3 inches long. And they're much bigger than some of the other tadpoles you might see out there, like tree frogs or toads out in our mountains. So they're very big. And there's other distinctions that we can tell them apart. When we release them, that's me in the middle there. Sarah Wenner, the one who helps me now, well, she'll be full-time when she gets her master's in a couple weeks. And then Sochi, my other intern, who's since moved on, but so I have they were interns at the time, and they'd help me release these, and we measure them and look at how far along developmentally they were, and then we release them. To release them into a stream right where the pen was. The pen was right in this. You can see it behind me. There's a little pen behind me, and we just release them right there. Then what happens? They do their froggy thing, right? They develop, so they start developing little legs like this guy, or bigger legs like these guys. They develop their back legs first, and then their front legs, and then you get froglets. So these froglets, when they have barely any little tail, and they have transformed from water breathing to air breathing, and you get froglets. So this was very exciting. This was the first froglet we ever detected for the project, and it was quite exciting. You can imagine, if you think back to the days when I was starting this project, no one knew if that was going to work. So to get an actual frog from an egg somewhere else that wasn't in its native population is pretty exciting. Everything's pretty exciting at every stage in these early stages of the project. So here's 4 little metamorphs. So there's some froglets going, and that's what they do. So this is the next year where those froglets are a little bit bigger, sitting on the pen waiting for those tadpoles to come out so they can eat them. So they do eat them each other, which is not helpful, but they do. Not a lot, and this is an adult. It's hard to tell the size, but these are 2 adults, probably a female sitting on a male. No idea why, I don't know what's happening here, but I thought it was funny, and so it's cool. But you can see that they get very large. So this is a large female that one of our volunteer helpers from the Santa Barbara Zoo, one of the herp keepers, a couple of the zookeepers help us a lot. I'm going to talk about the Santa Barbara Zoo in a minute, but they help us a ton. This is Will Macias, and he's a superstar frog catcher, and he's found this huge female. So I'm going to kind of do some data pre sort of the first 5 years of the project, and then in the last couple of years. I've sort of split it up. So the project started, I should have said this, in 2014. 2014 was the first time we ever translocated eggs. We released that year 849 tadpoles. Pretty good. 849 tadpoles into 2 creeks. The next year we did the same 2 creeks, few more tadpoles because we had an extra pen in one of the streams. And then in 2016 was where we really ramped up, and now we have 4 sites. So the 4 sites that we have, we released more tadpoles in 2017 and 2018. And so you can see that we basically released more tadpoles over the years, although we had a blip in 2018 where it wasn't as much. 2017 was like banner year. But you can see that there's 4 different creeks throughout the Santa Monica Mountains that are getting red-legged frog reintroduction. They're translocating. There's 4 creeks. Those 4 creeks, two of them had breeding age frogs in 2017 because they started here in 2014. But the streams that we started in 2016, they didn't have, they were going to have breeding age frogs in 2019. So I'm not really talking about them. That's why there's not really, those streams just do not have adults. So you can see the check marks under the adults. The adults are just in the other places where we had started earlier. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there's a little temporal change here. The great news, the point of the whole project is to get these frogs to survive to breeding age and then actually breed where the translocations are happening, right? So because the idea is we want to stop supplementing them and let them just do their froggy thing and survive. So in 2017, the first step of that happened where they bred. And then they kept breeding. 2018, they bred again. And actually, I can show you some of the data. So this is the very first egg mass we ever found in one of the translocation sites. There's a whole story that goes with this. I wasn't there, but then my team punked me and came back to the office and told me something was wrong, and I was very worried. And then they showed me this picture. So there was nothing wrong. It was the best news ever. But yeah, this was very, very exciting. We had frogs that were breeding on their own for the first time in a long time in the Santa Monica Mountains. So we did egg mass surveys at all of the sites. So that was at Santa Monica Mountains Site 1, where we found the first egg masses there in 2017. And we found 12. The rest of the season, they kept breeding. We found 12 total that year. The next year in 2018, we found 13 total that year. So that's really exciting, because that means that there's a decent number of females. There's at least 10 or 12 females, because they generally only lay 1 egg mass a year, the females do. So we knew, like, this is how many females we have here. This is great. So if we have that many males too, we're getting into, you know, several handfuls of frogs now, which is really great for a translocation, for the success of the project to get more frogs, right? Santa Monica Mountain Site 2, they kind of were flirting with breeding on 2017. We saw some kind of activity, but we never found any egg masses. And then 2018, finally, they were like, okay, we're doing it. And we found 7 egg masses there in the second site. So we're on our way. And so that was great news. That's those 2014 frogs, and they finally were sort of catching up. It took them a few years, but they were breeding on their own, which is great. We did night surveys, so they're nocturnal frogs. And so what you do is you do night surveys. We just did 1 survey in each site, and we found, you know, a decent number of frogs, 18 frogs in that Site 1. That kind of a little bit went along with the egg mass data. 23 frogs in Site 2, and in Site 3 and 4, those are the later sites, the ones we started in 2016. So their populations aren't quite as high. We haven't been doing the reintroduction there as long, and we found 6 each in those places. So that was 2018, and so for 2019, our stream sites that we have where we put them are beautiful. They're really great. Most of them don't have a lot of people. They have deep pools. They have great habitat. We were really excited for 2019 because all 4 of the sites should have at least 3-year-old frogs, and we were hoping they would figure it out, and we would have 4 breeding populations. Well, everyone knows what happened in November of 2018 was the Woolsey fire, and it was huge. It covered this huge area. And the landscape looked like this afterwards. And so, unfortunately, on this map, I didn't really put my sites, but every site burned in the fire. So that idea that we were going to put them in multiple places as a redundancy for a catastrophic event did not work for something the size of the Woolsey fire. And the most worrying part was that the source population burned. And it has burned in the past, and it persists, and it has persisted for thousands of years. through a fire regime that used to be less intense than it is now. But there have been fires in the area and they have survived. So we were worried about them, but we were really focused on them. So the translocation, it breaks my heart to think about the translocation was going so well and then all of my sites burned down. But the source population is really the important part. So we focused on them. So right after the fire, November 13th was when we did some daytime surveys and we did some night surveys. Well, as you can see from this picture, there's a frog. So these frogs are incredible. It's completely black. I can show you, this is what it looked like on November 13th. It's just completely black through the stream corridor. These are all the willows that burned. You can see the water though, there's still pools. It's covered with green. It's duckweed. Duckweed is covering the pools at this time. And that's very common for the fall because it's sort of grown all summer long and you've got these duckweed, and the frogs don't seem to mind living with the duckweed. They don't particularly like laying egg masses in duckweed, but that they're used to it in the fall that it would be there, and it possibly provides some cover for temperature in those pools that they might like because it gets real hot up there. And I'm sure it provided some refugia for them when this fire came through. So the fire coming through a place is a short event, right? That fire probably swept through there in not very long of a period of time, a period of minutes possibly. And then what they're left with is black, no biomass left on the shore, so no food. But what they're also left with is hot ground. And so we actually did find a couple of frogs that were dead with burnt feet. So, and that happens with our mammals as well, that don't really have any, they burn their feet trying to get away after the fires come through. So we did find that, but definitely there's, a lot of the reptiles and amphibians also go underground. There's tons of squirrel holes all around, and so they'll go bury themselves underground. So a lot of frogs survived. And you can see this guy has green on him. He's been in the water, and he's now out of the water because now he's looking for food on land, and that's what they're doing. So the source population, so I should tell you before I get to that, the source population, we went out a couple of times at night right after the fire. Well, we went out a few times. So then I went in December, and we found, I think it was 90 frogs in one night survey right after the fire, and about 95 frogs the next time we went out. Just by sight, we didn't catch them. We didn't want to stress them out. We just wanted to look at them and just see if they were there. And so we were really happy that so many frogs would be found in a place that was so devastated by a fire, 2 weeks after a fire. So that was good news, is that we thought, okay, these frogs are alive, but will they breed, and not for the project, but just will they survive? Like, will they survive enough to sort of breed on their own? Well, luckily, yes, they did. We went and we found, that's me. We found, it's hard to see, there's little pink flagging in this photo. I don't know if you can see that, but we flag all of our egg masses, and they have a number, and we take data on them and take photos and stuff. And not that we were planning on moving eggs or anything like that, but we did take the data, and we found 19 new egg masses. So we were like, wow, that's great. It's not the same as other years where we found, the year before we found 90 or 85. But this year, this is great. Okay, we found 19 at least. I was afraid that the females wouldn't be able to get enough food to fatten up to even have eggs to lay, because of, we were finding skinny frogs, and there's just, the habitat was so, just their food that they prefer, which is the terrestrial bugs, were so few and far between. So this is the habitat a little bit later when, so this is during the spring. This is early 2019, and that's Sarah climbing out of the pool there. And you can see it's greening up a little bit. So that green up is really good. Remember, we had great rain right after the fire. That green up is really good because that means the bugs are going to come back. So we had the breeding happen, but then what happened was, there's an egg mass there in the murky water. They don't seem to mind the murky water. They're just breeding. But what happened was, a big rainstorm was going to come, and it was supposed to come in the middle of February. And we were afraid that these 19 egg masses that we found were going to be washed away. And if this population is going to sort of continue, we didn't want that to happen. We weren't sure what to do. So what we did is we relied on our partners at Santa Barbara Zoo, and we harvested 4 partial egg masses, so similar to what we had done every year before that, but instead of taking them and putting them in the pens, in the streams, in the wild, we took them to the Santa Barbara Zoo. And so Santa Barbara Zoo, that's when they'll see us again and me, and we put them in these tanks and they grew and it was awesome. But we were starting to figure out, okay, well, where do we put them now? Because the habitat, all of the places burned, right? So we didn't know where we were going to put them. The habitat did look like this. So this is one of our translocation pools. So notice this rock on the left, and there's some, nice reflective water. That water's about 3 feet deep. And it's completely mud after the fire, right? So the fire just burns everything, and then it rains, and then it just becomes a river of mud. Those are our pens in the water. So that's the same pool, just a different perspective. And the pools are in the water, and pens are in the water there. That's from the year before, in 2018, and then that's what it looked like now, or it looked like right after the fire, and it still looks like that actually. So this is another one of our places. You can notice up on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a big sycamore and these 2 twin rocks. And you can see right there, our pen is right below those 2 twin rocks there. There's the sycamore tree on the left and the twin rocks, and it's just completely filled with mud. This is another one of our pens in the water, and this pool just filled up right after. So basically what happened was we got enough rain in 2019 that some of the pools scoured out a little bit. And so what we did is we were able to, you can see this 2019 data, we had 0 pens in the water. There was no place to put a pen or anything. There's not deep enough pools. But we did release tadpoles. We released over 1,100 tadpoles. Those are from the Santa Barbara Zoo. Those were growing in the Santa Barbara Zoo. We drove those in a bucket to 2 different creeks and we released them. The good news about that is that we found tadpoles and froglets that we know were from the Santa Barbara Zoo in those 2 streams that we put them in. So that was good. That was very good news. So we know that that's kind of like a backup if we ever need to do the zoo again, we can do that. The egg masses, though, what we wanted to know was anybody gonna, like, what was the breeding gonna be like in 2019? And so you can see we moved those Santa Barbara egg masses because that big storm was coming, right? We moved those. They just kept breeding, and most of those egg masses didn't even get washed away. So again, the frogs are smarter than I am, and I made the decision to save the frog eggs, and I didn't even really need to do that. so that's good news, that they survived. And we had, look at in 2019 in the source population, just this incredible breeding year. So that was good news. They did breed, and they were doing fine, and there's a lot of adults. The bad news is those sites where we were expecting breeding, because it happened the year before, which was site 1 and 2. 2 didn't breed at all. 1 bred, they only had 4 egg masses, and the rest of them, even though they had frogs that were that age, there's just no habitat left. We did night surveys afterwards in the translocation streams, and you can see the 2019 column there. We did find frogs in all 4 sites. So we did, even though the habitat's terrible in some of the translocation streams now, and in 2019 it was bad. We have adult frogs. They survived. They're not breeding, but they survived. And there's fewer of them. You can see in site 2, for example, the year before we'd caught 23. Now this time we'd caught 11. So there's fewer. We know we lost some. And we know we're missing some always in these night surveys, but all is not lost. So we don't have to start over because we've lost all the frogs in the translocation streams. Those adults have pretty good survivorship. And so if the habitat can come back from these mud basins, if the habitat can come back, then, and the frogs can survive long enough, we believe that they'll be able to breed again, since there are adults. That just hasn't happened because it still looks like this. So this used to be a big deep pool. Sorry, I don't have a comparison, but now it's just, it's just riffling water across some mud. Same thing with this. This used to be a very big deep pool. And it's just filled with sediment. So in 2020, the our source population had fewer egg masses, but still typical within the range of what's been happening in that area. 55 is not bad. It's a little bit it's lower than the years before that, but we're not worried. We think that's okay. Site 1 went right back up to 11 egg masses again. They're just like, yeah, we're fine. There's a ton of frogs in there. What's interesting about Site 1 is that the fire actually burned all around where the frogs are. So it burned upstream. So the pool's filled in with mud, but there was enough habitat there around where the frogs lived that was unburned that they never got skinny. They always had good habitat and good hiding from predators. And their pools came back because there was less debris to fall down into their pools, right? If it's unburned around them, it's just going to come up from upstream, but it's not going to be just from everywhere. So those pools came back, so they just went ahead and bred on their own, and they're feeling great. So Site 2 is a heartbreaker because they were getting there, and they didn't breed again this year because no habitat. They don't breed in little riffles of water across mud. That's not what they like. They like deep pools. Site 3 and 4, same thing. They look bad. But what we have found in all of the sites, we didn't do any translocations this year. There's no creeks, there's no tadpoles. We didn't do Santa Barbara Zoo, none of that, because of a myriad of reasons. But I can tell you that when we do egg mass translocations, it's right around like the 3rd week in March, and you guys are still experiencing what we were experiencing in the 3rd week of March, I'm sure, as I am stuck in my house. And one of the reasons that we didn't do any of this translocation this year is because of the pandemic. There were other reasons, but yeah, we have special circumstances with the pandemic as well. So that's a bummer. So after the fire and now this, we couldn't really get creative and do the zoo anyway because they were closed. And anyway, so everything's on hold, and Sarah and I just keep saying the frogs will be fine. The frogs will be fine. We keep reassuring each other that they're gonna survive through the year. So we have found the egg masses in the sites. We have found adults and we have found subadults. We're waiting to see if there's going to be any froglets in our Site 1. So we should expect some froglets in our Site 1 very soon, like now to August is when we're going to see some froglets. So hopefully I'll be able to update this chart or this table to reflect that. And then, so basically there's good news and bad news, and our next steps are that we are going to go out and do night surveys again. So what we want to see is a stability of those adult numbers. That's what we would like to see, because we don't see them during the day. So we went out in the last fall, and we caught a bunch, less than we did the fall before the fire. We know they're alive, but we kind of have to see like how, and we can't do it during the breeding season. So we wait usually until like late summer or fall to do these surveys. So that's what we're doing. We also have to consider how we can do these surveys safely and stay socially distant. And it's very difficult to actually do the handling of the frogs and taking the data when you're not right next to each other. You usually need a partner. And so we need to consider that. Anyway, there's quite a few complications in everyone's life, but it is interesting to sort of think about, and all the scientists I know have trying to come up with creative ways to still collect their data in a safe way during the pandemic. So we're hoping to do that in a safe way in the fall. I think that's all I had. So I did ramble through those kind of fast. So I have plenty of time for questions. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so Katie, we have a couple questions. So was there ever any considering adding streams in the eastern Santa Monica Mountains where the Woolsey fire did not happen?
Yes, that's an excellent question. We have permission to put them in one of the state parks streams in the eastern part of the mountains. That site is very hard to get to and dries out during drought. And remember I said that they don't need year-round water, but they like it. So because we did so many surveys in this stream, we know that during the drought, it's dry for like years. So that's really not a good, so we have permission to do translocation there, but it's sort of like last ditch, maybe desperation if we were, and we thought about doing it actually like that last year. We thought, well, what if we just throw them in there and see if they survive? But that's not really my style. Let's just throw them in there and see if they survive kind of a girl. So I didn't want to do that. There was also another place in the eastern middle part of the Santa Monica Mountains that didn't burn that is absolutely fantastic habitat that I wanted to do desperately, and the landowners would not let me. There's some controversy there. So yes, there were several sites. There were 2 sites that we deemed as suitable. One very suitable, awesome place, and they wouldn't let me. So.
Okay, cool.
We might work on that coming up, because now we sort of have no places to do this project. And so we'll have to see what's going on with the pandemic by the spring. But
okay, and actually Bonnie asked that, so maybe she has suggestions or thoughts, and I feel like you can throw that out, Bonnie, if you'd like to in a little bit. So there was somebody who was living in the Amundsen Ranch when it was private property, and they know that there was a study on the frog population. Do you know why that study stopped, or do you know anything about that?
I just told you all about what's going on there.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That study is not stopped. That is ongoing.
Cool. Okay. Do you know about any other studies in the rest of California with the red-legged frog or translocations or?
Oh yeah. So let's see. So Pinnacles National Monument, a guy named Paul Johnson, a biologist there, he developed this sort of protocol based on other translocations of amphibians too. I'm not sure. There's a few other things where people were moving eggs and putting them in pens and then putting them in water. And that's basically what he developed. And his pens look different than ours. We did different things than he did, but that's the basic thing. He was the one who kind of talked me through, like, this is how you separate an egg mass, and this is what you're gonna, so we consulted a lot with him and his protocol. His reintroduction was from a population of red-legged frogs in this creek. I've never been there, but there's this creek, and then they used to be in this reservoir, but the reservoir got filled up with fish. So they're Pinnacles National Monument, or what's it called now? I don't even know if it's called National Monument now. Anyway, Pinnacles removed their fish from the reservoir, and then what he did is he took the egg masses and put them in pens up in the reservoir, and did that for like 5 years in a row, and then did a bunch of monitoring. Same thing we're doing, and that area is just full of frogs now. So that's great. So that was a successful thing. I know that up at Golden Gate, a guy named Darren Fong, he runs a California red-legged frog reintroduction up at Golden Gate, and he's been doing it. I think he started maybe the year after we did, or maybe 2 years after we did. His reintroduction, same kind of protocol, doing very well, same kind of thing. You may have heard in the news that they're reintroducing California red-legged frogs to Yosemite. What's going on in Yosemite is a little bit different. They're having the San Francisco Zoo raise their tadpoles to froglet size and then releasing froglets. They have a bigger problem with chytrid than we do, or we think that's the case. And so for whatever reason, I haven't really talked to them about that. They thought it was better to have the zoo involved and release them as froglets rather than just raise tadpoles in the creeks and ponds that they have. They have bullfrog issues. They have people monitoring them for raccoon predation, all these different things. It's a much more well-funded, much more expensive project than ours. Ours is done on the cheap. We take eggs, we put them in the pens. We have people that go and help us. The Santa Barbara Zoo volunteers will help us. They got on my permit. They're so great. And they help us, and they help me for free. So all of this it's very cheap when you don't have to involve like zoos and vets and things like that. Anyway, so Yosemite's doing that. They're doing reintroductions right now. These are our partners from USGS, and they're basing their project a lot on our project, where they are taking California red-legged frogs from Baja, and they're transferring them across the border into Riverside County and somewhere else, I forget. Somewhere else in Riverside County. Anyway, that just happened this year for the first time. So there's quite a few going on. Those are the ones I know about. I think I said them all here in California.
Cool. Okay, another question is, do they translocate, or do they hop onto other streams, hop over, or do they stay where they were?
That's a good question. So they don't move very far. The studies have been done where they really don't, at least in our area in Southern California, they don't move very far. They just basically, they'll move up and down the stream. You won't necessarily find them in the same pool all the time. They're not like that. They're not territorial or anything. But we don't really know how much they can actually, we know that their frogs can travel several kilometers, like 5, 6, 7 kilometers, and they can go, let's say if we have 2 streams in 2 different canyons, and one wants to go up and over, a hill or something to get into the next stream, we think that that can be done. They're just fairly far apart. There's not that many frogs. We don't think that there's so many frogs that they're kind of thinking like, I got to get out of here. So we think that they're going to just be sort of stuck in their good habitat that we've, that we thought it was good, and it turns out to be good, and they're there. Who knows what these post-fire frogs are doing? Maybe they are going up and down the stream and thinking like, where can I go? This is all crap, like where can we end up? So they may be trying to do more dispersal post-fire. We just don't know. We're not following them. Just a related answer to that question is, some people ask me why we didn't just take adults and throw them into another stream. And people have done that. People have tried to move frogs out of an area because they were going to like do construction or something, and there were frogs there, and they didn't want to like harm the frogs, or it's against the law actually to harm the frogs. And so they would move the frogs to another pond, somewhere away, and all of them come back. Like the adults do have sort of a homing behavior, so they will come back. They do want to stay where they are, unless it's an animal that wants to disperse. They will want to go back to where they were from. So that's why we didn't move adults. It's very far away, and they have a long journey, and there's many freeways between where we put them and where they lived before. So egg masses are good.
Cool. So one question is about what would the population at one of your sites need to be in order to decide like we are no longer needing to move egg masses here?
Well, my goal was that a population would have had 5 years breeding on their own. That was my goal. 5 years breeding on their own, and we would just say like, okay, we're either going to add another site, or we're going to start kind of thinking maybe outside the Santa Monicas. I don't know. We kind of like, it would be something that I would talk about with my group, collaborators. But we didn't get there until before the fire. So now, with site one is this site that is breeding on their own. This is the 4th year they've bred on their own. We didn't put any tadpoles there this year because I told you we didn't do any work on this spring, or I shouldn't say that. We worked on it, but we didn't do the normal translocation process this spring. So it may be that we just call it quits on that site from now on, or do we do another year? Maybe. I have to get together with everybody and find out, but that was the original plan, was that it was 5 years of translocations, and if it didn't work, and we were never, not 5 years of, it was 5 years of translocations and then monitoring, and then after that they were actually breeding, it was going to be 5 years of breeding on their own, just to answer your question. And the 5 years is fairly arbitrary, but it seems like long enough to cover, various like droughts and fires and things like that. So, in various conditions, and so yeah.
Cool. Okay, so one person said they feel like they have a lot of frogs around their house, but don't know if they're the red-legged frog. Do you want to give an easy identifier for them to know?
If you can hear them, they're not red-legged frogs. Red-legged frogs are very rare. I get this a lot, where people are like, I have a red-legged frog in my fountain, and I'm like, they're endangered. That means they're rare, but a lot of people do live in the mountains, and we're talking about the Santa Monica Mountains. So people could have them near their house. However, the frog that you hear, the ribbit, that's the Pacific tree frog. Now it's called the Baja California chorus frog. I'm going to keep calling it the Pacific tree frog for now, but so Pacific tree frog is a very common little teeny tree frog. It's about this big. It's about maybe an inch and a half long. It's all sorts of different colors, very pretty. It can be many different colors, but they have toe pads. If you see one, you see that it has toe pads, and it'll have a dark eye stripe. So like a dark brown stripe across its eyes. And that's what you hear. They're very loud. And California red-legged frogs, you can hear them, but basically you have to be in the stream. You would be like down in the pools with us, and then we would hear them. So they're very quiet. And yeah, the ones you have around your house, if you can hear them, they're very loud. That's the Pacific tree frog.
Nice. Okay, so we have one volunteer who completed the California Naturalist program at SECI. And one of the presentations was on the endangered mountain yellow-legged frog in the
Yes.
CSE. Do you know if the same chytrid issue is affecting the red-legged frog? I don't know if I said the word right.
Yeah, you did.
Or would it be a variant?
That's a good question. So yeah, they have big problems. Yeah, that's, I don't know if you heard, if it was Danny that gave you guys that talk, but they have big issues. The chytrid fungus seems to be a bigger problem in the cold, in areas where it's cold sometimes. So that's just kind of, I'm not sure if that's really anecdotal, if anybody's done a big story about it, but they, we don't know. We don't really swab our frogs, and we don't really follow them birth to death. So we don't know, well, hatching to death. So we don't really know how chytrid is actually affecting our population. Unfortunately, I did find 2 dead frogs this year on top of everything else that 2020 is giving us. There were 2 dead frogs, which I'd never found before. And they both had chytrid. We know that they have chytrid because they all have chytrid. But they just don't seem to die of it. They can develop resistance to chytrid. And so with the mountain populations, mountain yellow-legged frog, they're trying to make those frogs resistant by treating them with fungicide, and they treat them with various strains of things, and they're really working hard on them. But no, just a short answer of the question is, it doesn't seem like chytrid is as big a problem in our population, or in California red-legged frogs, maybe in general, as it is to those mountain yellow-legged frogs.
Cool. Okay, so a couple questions about if technology exists to radio tag frogs.
Yes.
Has that been considered?
You know, that my project's not cheap anymore if we do that. We also, it's kind of like, so why would we do that? So that was one of the things. You can put radios on frogs. They're like these little tiny resin radios with a long antenna and a battery inside. And you place it with a chain around their waist, so around their little hips. And they hop around with them, and then you have to go out and physically radio track them daily to know where they are. So it's not like the mountain lions where, you know, you log on to the computer and a GPS satellite is pinging to that lion's collar. And the reason that works is because the lion's so big. So you can have a GPS unit, and you can have the radio unit, and you can have the battery, and it goes up to a satellite and it comes down to your computer. There's nothing like that for the frogs because it's just too big. Technology maybe is going to get better, so something like that could be tiny. And there's various ways to track movement, but that would be one of them. And so someone would have to go out there every day and radio track them. And then it would be, so the radio tracking that has been done in our area on basically some of the frogs that are very, very close to where we are, but many years ago, before me, about 15 years ago, they found that the frogs moved up and down the stream. They moved up and down the stream, and they moved about, the farthest away, I think they found them like 60 or 80 meters away from the stream. And then they had ones that they just lost completely. So if they never find them, they don't know if, you know, the battery died on the collar, something ate it, which is really unusual. Things don't usually eat those things. Or it somehow corroded, it somehow broke. Or if the animal like went so far away that you know, or your intern with your antenna never hears them again because they're somewhere really far and you didn't walk that direction. There's only a certain amount of signal that a tiny little radio like that can give out. So I haven't come up with any reason to radio track our animals. And it does seem, and I'm pretty hands off when it comes to the translocated animals because I want them to just I want them to just do frog things. And so I don't really want to handle them that much. And I think that's, I think other people would be more hands-on studying the animals. And that's just what I've chosen to do. is to not do that. That's why we don't do that many surveys. We don't do very many hand captures. We do pit tag them. So I can tell you that there's these pit tags that we use on adults, and they're microchips. If you have your pet microchipped, it's the exact same thing. And they get inserted under the skin in the back, on their back, under the skin, which can be pinched up very easily. And those need to be read by a reader. So you have to have the animal in hand, but they can get read. So they're unique. They're a unique marker. Now there's some studies that have been done on like fish, where they do that with fish, where they put a bunch of tags in fish, and then they have these big readers that are like across the stream. And if your fish goes across the stream, they can read it. So you kind of can do movement that way, but we would have to have sort of an array of readers up and down a stream to get that kind of information. We just don't, this is not that kind of study. So somebody maybe in 10 years when I retire, they'll come and say, I want to study these populations more. I'm hoping that they'll still be there. So yeah.
Nice. Okay, how much does a frog eat on a daily basis?
Oh my gosh, I don't know that question. You know, their stomach's probably that big. They're going to eat as much as they can. And it's probably all at night. I'm sure that they're eating all at night, but, you know, whatever fits in their stomach, whatever they can catch. So I don't know. We don't expel. And then, you know what, there are studies where people have expelled the stomach contents, and that's why we know what they eat, at least in those populations. But I can't remember how many grams it is. Sorry, I don't know. I mean, it's probably hundreds of bugs a night.
Nice. Okay, so where there are New Zealand mud snail infestations,
Yes.
Does the red-legged frog exist? Can they coexist?
Yes. So our sites, it's kind of complicated because one stream has red-legged frogs throughout the whole thing, but only part of it has mud snails. So, but we have in 2 of our sites we have mud snails, and in 2 of our sites we don't. And we don't see an effect of mud snails. We haven't seen an effect of mud snails on the other native amphibians either. We haven't specifically looked at that. Mud snails were not a disqualifier when I was looking for places to put them. What was a disqualifier for where to put them was crayfish. So red swamp crayfish is a terrible predator of all life stages of frogs and newts, and non-native fish. We also didn't put them anywhere where there's bullfrogs. So there are places there where there's suitable habitat for red-legged frogs in the mountains, year-round water, deep pools, good habitat. Other species are kind of thriving there and sort of like hanging on, but we have crayfish and fish in those places, and you're just not gonna, it just was like, it's just starting at the basement to try to get red-legged frogs to grab hold in those places. So we didn't do that. So mud snails, I'm not going to say there's not an effect, and mud snails are kind of weird too, because we get post-fire, we haven't seen very many mud snails at all. Post-drought, at the end of the drought, we only saw mud snails in high densities in certain places. So it seemed like they died out. So mud snails are kind of a really, I don't know what's going on with the mud snails. It would be a good thing for someone to study, because there's certain densities that are supposed to harm amphibians, but we haven't seen that.
Okay. So I have a question about the map that you showed in the beginning, that range, right? Where they are. Mm-hmm. How do you get that updated? So if you have success and these other places have success, like how and when does that get updated?
That's a great question. So that was published in a paper with one of my colleagues at USGS, and it was a genetics paper, and they were looking at all the places where there are red-legged frogs at the time when this thing was published. It's a fairly recent paper, but I think the samples were from maybe the mid 2000s, or somewhere around 2010 or something like that. Like the sampling was done earlier than that. So yeah, so that's not really like an official like state map or anything. That comes from a scientific paper, a research paper that my friend John made for the paper. But it's a great question, because people that are trying to do things in this area, like I don't know, repair phone lines and repair cell towers and repair, like Southern California Edison and all these, they want to do work. And they don't, or Caltrans, they want to do work, and they're like, oh my God, you guys didn't tell us you put red-legged frogs here. And we go like, oh, well, as part of your environmental documentation, you're supposed to get, so then they finally figure out where red-legged frogs are, because it's not like common knowledge. We don't shout from the rooftops, hey, here's where they are. I mean, you'll notice I didn't tell you guys where any of the sites were. I'm not using names either. And that's mostly just being paranoid. And lots of people know where the frogs are, and lots of people know, as particular, where site 1 is. But we just don't amplify that. So it's a good question. I hope that eventually there's going to be somebody else that writes a paper, and they're going to be able to put like that, wait, there's red-legged frogs here and here and here. But Tori, it's a good question too, but it's also like, I don't consider the project a success yet, right? I don't consider, maybe site 1, I have faith that those frogs are going to survive there because they're doing well still. But all the other places, it's hanging on. You know what I mean? I before the fire, I would have said, yeah, we're getting there. It's going to be great. They're going to breed next year. It's going to be awesome. But until this is like 10 years in or something, I feel like it's all very tenuous to say, oh yeah, there's red-legged frogs here. Because even though there are red-legged frogs here, it's like, will they still be there in a little while? So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay, so there's 2 more. One person asked if you just have a picture of the New Zealand mud snails, and if you do, if that's easy. While you're answering the other questions, but I think you can
I don't.
even Google it. Okay, you can Google it, and I think the one that comes up is like them next to a coin, so you can see the size, and that's I've seen one on my boot for sure.
Yeah, if you look up New Zealand mud snail, you'll definitely get the shape. And what it looks like, but it's a much pointier snail. It's a small black snail, and it's very pointy, like an ice cream cone. It's like got that kind of dimension, where our native snails are more like a football. Okay. So yeah, so you'll be able to see. It's pretty easy to Google the New Zealand mud snails, and they're very small, and they can live on damp stuff. They can live for weeks. And it only takes 1 to infect a stream. They're pretty nasty little things. But we don't know how they're affecting our amphibians, and they don't seem to get into dense enough. They don't seem to get dense enough to really affect the populations, because they're not dense like every year, all year. Anyway, it's complicated, I think.
Do you know if the Chumash ate red-legged frogs?
Oh, probably. I think everybody ate red-legged frogs. I don't know. I would just assume, just as a person, they probably are delicious. I'm assuming they're probably pretty easy to catch. They were, so one of the things that caused their decline in the Bay Area was the frog leg market. And that's one of the reasons they think they imported bullfrogs from the southern part of the United States, is because they just ate so many red-legged frogs that they were becoming rare. So there is documentation around the turn of last century that people in the Bay Area did actually eat a lot of red-legged frogs. I've heard, so Frogtown in LA is supposedly named after red-legged frogs, and I've heard people talk about, oh yeah, my grandmother had recipes for frog legs and things like that. So I think that there were red-legged frogs abundant in the LA River too. And so I think people were probably eating them all around, even, past the time that the Chumash were, living in the mountains.
Nice. Okay. With Woolsey Fire funds and grant money and all that, would there be money to get the expensive rental equipment where you would change your study at all? Okay.
They don't. So it's funny. So fire money goes towards a few things, but research is not one of them. So let's just put it that way. There's zero money for any sort of add-on for research projects like that. That would be that. So that it doesn't go for that. It goes for restoration of things lost, and so it'll go a lot for like weed abatement, replacing cameras that were burned up or things like that. But as far as any research that goes on, researching things post-fire effects on plants, animals, they will not fund any of that. There's zero fire money for that. So there's a lot of money, but it's not for that.
Right. All right, so all I have is a comment. So if there's any other volunteers out there that want to ask any last questions, this is your last moment. So Evelyn was saying that they feel like the red-legged frog was what saved Amundsen Ranch, and that's their way of looking at it. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I love this story. So, you know, a consultant was working to, and you guys, I haven't been in the area as long. I lived in LA in the city, and I didn't even know Santa Monica Mountains existed for many years. So I really started working with the researchers here, and then got a job. But like for a long time, I just was in my LA bubble. But Amundsen Ranch was owned privately and then was owned by a bank and was going to be developed, and you know, tons and tons of houses. And what happened was they found red-legged frogs. A consultant found red-legged frogs. They also found the San Fernando Valley spine flower. So that's another thing that was an endangered species that they found. And yeah, there's a bunch of rigmarole, and someone kind of asked about the research project going on in Amundsen. At the time, what they did is they still were going to develop it, but what they wanted to do is they wanted to see if they could breed and take red-legged frogs into captivity. So they were going to take the red-legged frogs that were found there and put them in captivity, and I don't know what, maybe reintroduce them. I haven't ever talked to anybody, and I've only seen a couple of news articles about this, but they were going to move them and still develop the canyon, basically ruining the habitat there. But it was quite contentious, the whole project. And yes, part of it was, you know, there was going to be, the valley would have just gone right into Agoura Hills, right? That San Fernando Valley would have been just all the way over into Oak Park and Agoura Hills, but, and lots of traffic and all these things. But yes, the finding of an endangered species, 2 endangered species there, I think did help the community fight it. And now it's parkland. Nice. So success story.
Totally.
In my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, and then does the Arundo-Donax reed hurt the frog habitat?
Oh, it would. I think it would if it got there. But we that was one of the things that we also were looking for was excellent habitat with not a lot of invasive plants like Arundo that would really mess up the stream habitat. So. We don't have Arundo in any of the places where we put them, or in the source population. So, so it would, but luckily we don't have it there.
Okay. Are there any somewhat healthy red-legged frog habitats that coexist with introduced naturalized bullfrogs and crayfish? Maybe anywhere that you know.
Red-legged frogs in a nearby population, and it's in LA County, live with crayfish. They coexist with crayfish. Lots of red-legged frog populations throughout California, red-legged frog, I should say, so they're different than the northern red-legged frog. So California red-legged frog is the one that's endangered. There's lots of places within their range, or there's a few places within their range that they're quite common. Like there's a lot of them. There's like hundreds in a pond. And there'll also be bullfrogs there. And so there's been lots of studies. One of my friends actually has done a lot of studies between bullfrog, red-legged frog interaction, and they can coexist. The red-legged frogs just don't do as well, but they can coexist, and so there's examples of where they can coexist with those species. There's no examples of where anybody has tried to do this very tenuous, reintroduce them, because the very nature of the reintroduction is that you're only reintroducing a few. You only have this tiny population for a while until you can get big enough. So where they've coexisted and held on with the introduction of bullfrogs, there just must have been an overwhelming population size that they could get around it. I don't know if that's actually what she's found in her studies, but nobody's tried a reintroduction to my knowledge in a place where there's those species.
Cool. Thanks, Katie. That's all the questions that came in. The ending words from Carrie Perkins: strength in numbers.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate your interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
Really good. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, so much.
Okay, thank you, guys.
All right.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Lay. Thanks, Tori.